Good morning. Today on the Hidebound Convivium, better known as Kitchen Rants, I will be talking about Player Piano, a novel by Kurt Vonnegut. So I'm not always going to be talking about old science fiction books, but I thought this one was particularly salient for the moment, and well, I like it, and it just happened to be on my mind, so I thought I'd make a video about it, give you some of my thoughts about it. So to start out, I'm going to essentially give a recap of Player Piano, what it's about. It's about it's speculative fiction about a post-scarcity civilization in the United States at some indeterminate point in the future. The whole all of manufacturing has been automated. Most menial tasks have been automated, and the whole economy is controlled statistically by a large supercomputer. I can't remember where exactly it is, but basically there's a large supercomputer that calculates how many of a certain thing need to be manufactured so that they don't manufacture waste. A better way to think of the setting is luxury automated communism. That's a sort of a helpful term, I suppose. And the main characters of the book are set up in such a way that they can explore this this sort of setting, right? So you have one guy who is a high-ranking corporate official at one of these factories. You have another guy who is a sheik or a king from some sort of third world country, and he serves as sort of a vehicle by which the author can pick out the hypocrisies in the society and the way that it structured itself. A particularly poignant example is they bring this guy. He's on a tour of the United States. They're supposed to be hammering out some sort of deal between his country and the United States, and he's on a tour with a diplomat. So they go to a military base, and this soldier the soldiers are standing at attention, and he looks at them and says, "Oh yes, you have very fine slaves," and the diplomat says, "No, they're not slaves. They're free men." And the guy sort of humorously replies that they look like slaves to me. Obviously, it's a bit of hyperbole, but it's interesting nonetheless. So the main things that I want to talk about in regards to the book are obviously the way that this relates to our current situation with increasing automation in the workplace and the displacement of workers, especially low-skilled workers. So there's always the ever-present objection to critiques of automation. The standard critique of automation is that so many industries will be automated that there is no possible way that the economy can absorb all of the job displacement that will occur. And so we need some sort of solution, some sort of universal basic income, something like that. And the standard critique is, no, this has happened before at the beginning of the first industrial, or not the first industrial revolution, but the one around the turn of the century, when you had Luddites going around smashing looms, and lo and behold, the population has more than tripled, and a lot of people still have jobs. So you're wrong. But I think that objection ignores the potentially widespread effects of automation, just the sheer scope of automation. All the seamstresses that were put out of business by factories that make clothing could get jobs at the clothing factories. But when if the same clothing factories were run by some sort of automaton, then they wouldn't be able to. They would be completely displaced. So for my own part, I hope it's true that automation in the act of displacing people will create enough jobs for them. I don't think that's true. And like it or not, that's probably going to lead to unrest, which is something that's seen in the book, because a lot of the lower class people in the setting are very dissatisfied with their lot in life. So the way that low skilled people in the book make money is that if they can't find a job, they can go into the army, or they can go into the recycling and reclamation corps, I think is what it's called. They call them the reeks and the wrecks. And it's basically a do-nothing job. You stand around. The author actually makes a point of saying it's a do-nothing job. There's a crew of reeks and wrecks in one scene who are just tearing up a road and putting it back. They're not doing anything. It's sort of like, I remember reading a book about the Incan Empire, and apparently they had some sort of system. Don't quote me on this. I can't remember what the name of the book was, but apparently they had some sort of system by which they would conscript people into working corps so that they could build roads and things like that. And when they had nothing to do, to avoid them getting rowdy, I suppose, they would order them to pick up stones from one mountain and start moving them to another mountain for no reason. I highly doubt that, but anyway, the precedent is there. It's busy work. It's busy work, and it pays a wage, because this is America. We can't just give out money for free, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be capitalism. That's another thing, is that the whole system undergirds itself as being infinitely fair because it is capitalistic. Another thing is the credentialism that exists in the book, and it's funny because it's almost exactly like the sort of credentialism we have today, but it's so blatant and so obvious that it's like a parody. They have these punch cards, because the book was written in the 50s, so everything's analog. They have these punch cards that have certain dots poked out of them that represent where you went to college and how much college you did, and so on and so forth. And so they have this sort of informal caste system. And it's allotted by the spots in colleges are allotted by basically the SATs or the ACTs. It's some sort of low grade IQ test. So like it's pretty accurate as far as how our current situation is set up. It's just a little more in your face. And so, right, what this ends up doing is it sets up an informal caste system. And you can see the same thing occurring today. Although I would argue that even when you have like really intelligent people in the lower classes, they still don't, they're not upwardly mobile. And they're not as upwardly mobile as they would be in such a system. But leave that aside. Another thing I want to talk about is the particular brand of consumerism that's practiced in the novel. So normally when we talk of consumerism, what we're talking about is how everything is commercialized and how everything can be oriented towards delivering a service or a product. Well, when we talk about that with the assumption that the product is something that the people want. But that's not how it works in the book, because they figured out that sort of human need or human want is inefficient for an economy of such a scale. And the book gives an example of a guy. He starts talking about how he had a neighbor who had this beautiful organ or something like that. He bought an organ, but he wouldn't replace his old stove. And this was somehow terrible, because how could you think about buying an organ without replacing your old stove? Come to find out that basically your buying patterns are given to you by a computer, the big AI that controls the economy. And it tells you essentially what you're going to buy, and then it buys it for you. It takes your money out of your bank account and buys it for you. So even down to the individual purchases, right? They're controlled to an extent. Well, I mean, controlled completely. Controlled to the extent that they're controlled completely, of course. So what else? And yeah, the thing about the artificial intelligence in the book is that it's undeniably the most efficient way to run that economy, right? There, when you have the AI in control, you're not running wastes. You're not doing wasted production. You're utilizing all of your resources, but it's not tailored to human need. The whole economy becomes tailored to the AI's need, or what the AI thinks the people need, right? But you see, this is a pretty popular idea nowadays, that artificial intelligences can run everything the best. And I agree. Artificial intelligences could probably run the economy the most efficiently, just because of their sheer computational power. But the most efficient economy does not translate into being the economy most, what would you say? Most fostering of human flourishing, right? Or the most oriented towards human prosperity in sort of a eudaimonia way. It can only apportion resources, because there's really no algorithm for how to live the good life, or how to promote human flourishing. So that's a shortcoming that I think is explored in the novel, and it's something that I think we're going to run into head first at some point pretty soon. And the last thing I want to talk about is this very interesting use of the word saboteur. So in the book, they have these people who are known for breaking up the factory machinery, going in, placing bombs, or gumming up the machines. And they're just called saboteurs, but the word takes on this connotation of being, an awful person, right? So if you're a saboteur, you're not just someone who smashes machines. You smash the material progress of the nation. You're against the people of the United States. If there's not, that parallels the way that thought criminal is used in 1984. It perfectly parallels the way that, the infinite list of pejoratives that progressives use for people are used today in common parlance. And so the interesting or unique thing about the way saboteur is used is that it is a normal word. It's a common word. It's not like thought criminal, which is a made-up word. Or, even to a certain extent, the word racist is a made-up word. But saboteur is a completely normal word that has really no moral connotation. Really depends on what you're sabotaging. But this society has spinned the word in such a way that it takes on this horrible pejorative label. And that, to me, is one of the most paramount signs of the time. So I know this was a little bit more rambly, but to recap, things about player piano are the focus on automation and displacement. I would say the book shows a society that practices consumerism for consumerism's sake. It's not buying things ordered to something. It's buying things because the economy has to run, so on and so forth. Right. A self-perpetuating system. The next thing is artificial intelligence, how it runs things the most efficiently, but it's not necessarily the most the best way to foster human flourishing or to create conditions in which people would say that this is the best possible life, right? And then another thing is the use of language, specifically the way that normal words like saboteur can be inverted and turned into pejoratives. All right, so that has been my take on Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano. I hope you enjoyed. This has been the Hidebound Convivium.